So we have Mark Toussaint from OWL Cyber Defense, and we have Peter Sieber from HEMA. And maybe the two of you would like to say a couple of, just a couple of words before we get started, just by way of introduction. Peter, you can go first if you want.
Well, if I must. Yeah, my name is Peter Sieber. I'm with HEMA. In our organization, or let's say it's that way, I'm, let's say, having an experience or having a background of safety-related process automation that goes back to something like, I think, 1988. So I'm not really a newcomer in this business. In our organization, I have two roles. On one hand side, I'm the Vice President of the region China. And my other role is I'm the Vice President for Norms and Standards. And in that role, I'm engaged with the development of standards such as IEC 61508, 61511, and 62443.
Thanks. Mark?
Okay, thank you. My name is Mark Toussaint. I'm a product manager at OWL Cyber Defense. I'm responsible for our product portfolio of products that address the critical infrastructure space. OWL as a company has been building data diodes for more than 20 years. We started on the DoD, NSA side of the house, and about 12 years ago moved into the critical infrastructure space. So that's just a little bit of background on OWL.
Great, thanks. I do want to take questions from the audience. I just want to start with, with kind of a general opening question for the panel. So I'm kind of going back to that statement that Alfredo made earlier about how we don't have the money because the system is working fine. That one really stuck out to me. So I'm gonna lead with that one because I've experienced this too, working with end users in process safety and in some other areas where this is a very common excuse, right? Things are running fine. Why should I have to invest money in either safety or more cybersecurity or new stuff when the system is running fine? And what you're telling me is the money that we're going to invest might prevent something bad from happening, right? So I guess if you have any words about cost justification, project justification, how can we work with the upper levels of management to get them to realize that there is a business value proposition in increased cybersecurity and safety, which I think would already be there, but does anybody care to comment on that?
Well, if worse comes to worse.
Up for grabs.
Why not? Well, I think this is a very valid statement. Systems and things are running fine, and you don't have to worry unless the unexpected happens, right? And if you look at today's world of increasing integration of all sorts of systems, of a kind of inflation, I would call it, of additional threats and risks that nobody thought about, let's say, a decade ago, I guess it is very important to understand what you have, understand what your risks were, and understand what your risks are. And if you do this thoroughly, you will be able to identify whether there's a need for modifying something or whether you don't need to care.
Yeah, I would comment on that as well. I think, like I alluded to in my presentation, I think where we're at with our risk assessment process around cybersecurity, it's still at the end of the day, the risk that we say we have is a function of our collective professional judgment, and it's not as quantitative as we would like it to be. And sometimes I think probably our leadership likes to see harder numbers rather than something a little more qualitative. It kind of allows you to kind of gives you some wiggle room.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to add a little bit. Sorry.
Absolutely.
I think we are getting to the point that people are noticing that they have to change, but we still have people on the field that are working for a long, long time, and they say, well, my system is still working. I can find spare parts on eBay. I have this machine. It's working fine, has never had a problem. Nobody have tried to get in. And we have, the other extreme that you get, probably everybody has seen what happened with Ring and the video cameras like 2 months ago, or you guys have seen what happened with some other things, like the Chinese cheap cameras that were spoofed, and everybody was getting DNS, denial of service attacks from there. On the industrial, it's a little bit more robust on some places, but like we're saying here, okay, some people just put the devices on the default mode, default password, user, admin, and everybody can get in. We are getting to the point that people are changing, they are asking the right questions, but it still is probably part of our business is to educate our clients and let them know, okay, this is there, this is gonna happen, and it's just a matter of time if you don't change. That was my fast answer.
No, good comment. Anyone else?
Yeah, I
Greg,
would say
comment?
it's definitely a culture change that has to take effect. I mean, we were much more successful from an OT approach when we started to wrap in the HSE guys for our the risk assessments, and to have them provide their feedback of as we explain what would happen if these old systems failed, and to get them involved with that. And I think for us it was more successful, the larger audience that we could involve in that assessment process. I think the information made it back from multiple paths to the C-suite.
Excellent.
I think it's important that we've talked in the presentations about assessing and managing that risk. And one of the things that I want to point out, as Alfredo alluded to in his presentation, is that he had a requirement to fulfill, and he really honed in on what is the most important risk that he wanted to address. In engaging with customers, I always ask the question, and it sounds like a very simplistic question: what are you trying to protect? Because there are many things that can be protected, but they all aren't assigned the same level of risk. So it's important to look at the different use cases that you're trying to protect, and then really put your focus on those areas where you see the most risk.
I think we have a question from the audience back here. Oh, Sid.
Yeah, for me. Yeah, I'm sorry, I was sitting at, I'm just curious because, one thing is to have, cyber risk is one, I don't want to say it's a separate thing. I mean, that's the topic here today. But in this case, it seems to me when you're talking about from a safety perspective, like I'll use Shell as an example there. I mean, I would assume that oil companies have massive liabilities if they don't make sure that their systems are safe, reasonably safe. I don't know what the terminology would be. Like in the chemical industry, they have this thing they use, and I'm not in the chemical industry, but they have a term like reasonable care. And I mean, it's one thing to say accidents happen, and they do happen, and I would assume our legal systems and everything probably accept that, the fact that it's something there. But if you didn't take some level of reasonable care, whatever the terminology might be in your industry, I would think the liability would really escalate for those companies. So in a way, maybe that, and specifically because we're talking about if you do the analysis from a safety perspective, you're pretty much saying, I analyzed it and I said, I don't care about this. It's almost like actively saying that, as opposed to saying, well, I put in all the reasonable kind of controls I could and it caused a problem. It seems to me different. Is there anything from that perspective to address the question Larry said? Because it's not just a financial decision anymore, it seems to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, from a safety point of view, it's very clear how we get to what we deem is good enough. And that involves that tolerability criteria table. It involves the next question, ALARP, that's all carefully documented. And so there's a very careful process around that. But I think where we need to improve is on the cybersecurity side, because the barriers that we're taking credit for in our safety case, a subset of them do have cyber vulnerabilities. Now we have best practices we apply across the board for the most part, but if you start breaking it down and you say, well, what are my really critical systems? Well, maybe it's those safety barriers that have cyber vulnerabilities. Maybe the next level is, well, your production systems that are producing the dollars, they're important too, and they have cyber vulnerabilities, and that's another set, right? And then you have So you have a spectrum of criticality, but those safety barriers are probably the top of the list, right? And then you have to decide, what's the appropriate level of cyber controls that I want to use on my safety barriers and to maintain the integrity of that barrier over time, right? Because it will degrade over time, and there needs to be a program in place to manage that over time.
Well, if you won't mind, my first comment would be accidents do not happen. Accidents are caused by either somebody or something. Well, this is one thing. The other thing is, I think, also recapping the discussion on the presentations I saw here during the recent couple of days, I think unifying the risk evaluations regarding functional safety on one hand side and cybersecurity aspects on the other hand side is one of the big challenges of these days. And I have the great pleasure to be a member of a working team of IEC TC65 where we discussed exactly this topic. And in the beginning, it was even questioned by the IEC whether there is a need for having this kind of stipulations at all. And then we got a team of about 20 experts, 25 experts, and it just took us 18 months to come to the conclusion there is obviously a need. It is obviously almost mission impossible to really get all the different things and all the different stipulations and all the different viewpoints together in one document. So one of the things we did is we first of all cut back the scope of our document. So we said then at the end we just want to look at IEC 61508 and IEC 62443, and we try to answer the question what need to be done in order to harmonize both. And yeah, just last month a technical report was published by the IEC that is the technical report 63069. It's a high-level document, relatively easy to read, just something like 34 pages, where we try to describe on how to bring together functional safety and security in order to come to a common setup, to a common definition that is covering both functional safety as well as security. Because at the end of the day, it needs to be kept in mind that there is no safety without security. I think you made it very clear in your presentation, Mark. And this is one of the, from my point of view, first attempts to really describe the necessary steps and the necessary strategy in a global fashion. So if you would be interested to know more about it, my suggestion would be go to the web shop of the IEC. There you can get this document that really gives an interesting insight, again, on something like flight level 1000.
Yeah, thanks for that, and I know I'm interested in that. That's 63069, right, IEC 63069. Okay.
I would just like to add on, sort of at a more grassroots level, it's important that you know and understand the systems that you're trying to secure. It's very common that we go out to customer sites we get asked to come in and do a proof of concept. We're given a set of requirements, and when we get to the site, what we learn is that the environment is radically different from what the customer thought they had. And the reason this often happens is they buy a system from their automation vendor, the automation vendor installs the system, they get it running, they throw the keys over to the system, they leave the site, and in many instances, the engineers that are tasked with managing those systems often don't know about some of the details of how these systems communicate. And it's very common that we find data flows that out of a system that were not even known to the end customer. So it's important that, again, what are you trying to protect, and what are the nuances of what that system does and how it communicates to different entities?
Yeah, and that's not limited to safety systems, right? And I think, Greg, you mentioned facility and access control systems, right? And this is something we didn't get a chance to address during the panel discussion on Monday, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are on things like physical access control systems and how they relate to cybersecurity and safety. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, from the physical security side, of course, we're securing doors and and cabinets and everything else. So, I mean, that really needs to roll over into the cyber side of putting protective measures on those networks and those systems. Yeah, I mean, from the physical side, it's obviously increased
Yeah.
since 9/11.
Yeah, we've obviously heard a lot
But
more
the-
talk about it too from ARC, from our end user customers as well. Yeah.
So that just needs to roll into to me, it needs to migrate from that physical side into the virtual or network side, and concentrations need to be put in those.
Yeah, you could have all the safety and cybersecurity in the world, but if you have an unlocked cabinet or poor physical access control, none of that means very much, right?
Yeah.
So, anybody else care to comment on that?
On the physical side, it also, of course, will depend on what you have. My systems, typically, physical access is really hard. If you have your asset, down the water, it's not a big deal. Nobody will get there. Or you have like a 68 bolts this big to get access to any switch inside there is really not a problem. The problem is somebody with an USB probably is your biggest risk in any systems I think that we have. And passwords and access control, probably that will be the nightmare for everyone here, more than, or at least in my case, somebody have access to a cable and plug a computer or a device. So it will be in cases, case by case, and you will have to go and check what really is your factor risk, and that's the reason matrix are there, and you just go do your analysis, do your homework, and get where you need to improve or get there.
Yeah, I'll make a comment. This was just kind of a fun exercise for me, I don't know, about a year or two ago, where I was involved in an audit at one of our refineries. And one of the things we observed was the fence line, the physical fence line around the refinery. And it was in a certain state, I guess. But we have a nuclear reactor in our backyard, or a nuclear power plant in our backyard. So me and my wife got on our motorcycle, we went around the river, across the bridge, and went over to this nuclear power plant. And I was looking at their physical security, their fence line, and it was like triple fence with a cement, one of those road barriers that we have. It was like 3 times thicker than that, ringed all the way around the reactor. And then there was cameras, and when we pulled up, the camera actually turned towards us as we pulled up, and I was taking pictures. And they also had guard towers that were smoke glassed, these guard towers, probably guys with guns in there, right? So huge difference between what we have at a refinery versus nuclear power plant. So at the end of the day, it's about, what is the risk that you're trying to mitigate?
I think, of course, this is one aspect that you need to know what is the risk you have to control. On the other hand side, I guess it needs to be underlined what you just said. The most important is know your crown jewels and make sure you put them in a basket that is sufficiently protected, because this is where it starts. When we got the information about the Triton case, which did not infect us, luckily, but it was a good motivation for us to think about what we do, what our customers do, and we used this opportunity to start a reviewing program, and we provided to our customers an assessment where we say, okay, let's talk about what is the setup of your safety system and how do you operate your safety systems. And we also have the situation that we have a huge legacy fraction in our systems and at our customers. And we found quite a few things where we say, well, with relatively easy measures, you can do a lot in order to improve safety. And of course also security. And I think this is the other important thing, that you really need to look at what you have, how you operate it, and then you pretty easily will be able to find what are the areas for improvements. And typically, these are not the big things. What we found are a lot of relatively easy hanging fruit, where it was very simple and very less costly activities. You can improve security a lot. Things like, if you have an engineering station that is connected to your safety controller, is it really necessary to have it online 24/7? Or isn't the safety controller sufficiently reliable so that you can switch off your engineering station when the plant is in regular operation? And this is, for instance, one of the very easy attack vectors you can get rid of by just using the switch at the engineering station, right? And there's a lot of similar things that can be done that on its own are not really big things, that are no things that require a dedicated engineering program to be implemented first, but that requires to know what you have, to think about, and to act with the aim to really make the things more secure.
I'm sorry, I think we had a question from the audience.
Yeah, I'm curious. When Alfredo went through his presentation, the solution they came up with was the use of a data diode. And I was curious, when Greg went through his, Greg, you showed a bunch of potential vulnerabilities, and Mark, with your assessment, risk assessment, applying security concepts as well. When you do find these issues that may be vulnerable to cyber, what are some of the solutions that you guys have deployed?
Certainly. So for the time that I spent in oil and gas, I had actually implemented the Clarity solutions on board 5 of our vessels. So I've got a lot of time and energy invested in that particular vendor, but I mean the other vendors that are here at the show and some that even are not here all offer fantastic solutions. So we make those recommendations to the vessel owners or the terminal owners and let them really pick the best solution that fits their needs. And then we can offer them assistance to implement and then go in and reassess systems after they've implemented those. So yeah, it's not just hey, this is terrible, and they say, okay, thanks, see you next year. We help them come up with alternative choices of solutions and then to get those implemented.
Yeah, so we have a range of cybersecurity controls that we pick from, sort of like the HSE process picks safety barriers, and they include firewalls, in practices like antivirus, patch management, system hardening, and segmentation, with the firewalls, zoning, and so forth. But it varies by project or say by by implementation. A risk assessment would be done to figure out, okay, what zoning do we need to use and what controls do we need to bring to bear on that. And Shell's got just a huge range of types of assets. Well pad out in the field versus a floating facility. Like I think we have an asset called Prelude, which is one of the largest sort of floating production facilities in the world. So we have this huge range, and so ideally we would use a risk assessment that is specific to that particular asset and apply the controls. But we are looking at data diodes as well. I wouldn't say we have any experience with that yet, at least that I know of, but that is another control that we could bring to bear on that as well. But yeah, and fundamentally architecture, with how you do your segmentation with firewalls, that's sort of the foundational step, and then you go up from there with generally the common controls that we're familiar with. But it's a matter of where do you apply them and take a risk-based approach from that point of view. How often do you patch? That may vary by the criticality of the system, for example.
Just to carry on from that, obviously OWL's a data diode vendor, so we have some bias here. However, when we work with customers, we often reference a white paper put out by the Department of Homeland Security, 7 strategies to protect critical infrastructure, which really sort of maps out a very basic and fundamental path forward of how to control and protect your systems. So if you haven't read that, I'd recommend that each of you look up and do that, because it defines a roadmap of how to go about and look at your system, look at your individual communications, again, assess what am I trying to protect, and then what is some of the best methodologies for doing that. So I highly recommend that you look into that white paper.
One small thing I wanted to add is also it's going to depend like everybody's saying, what you're protecting. If you have something that it have to be bidirectional, well, you will have to see there is bidirectional diode solution too, but you're gonna have to really see how you can protect your system, how critical it is, and if really need that level of protection. You maybe have some data that is just data and it have no risk, so you maybe don't care, or with a small firewall or a managed switch with ACL rules is fine enough, that could work for you. But if you have a critical asset that is a lot of money, or the risk is that you can have a big loss of money, material, and people, well, now you put what is going to be the risk and how much money I need to invest and how I had to protect it. That probably will be, how you pick and choose what you really need and what you really want. And talk to the experts. If you are or you don't feel to that level, just find somebody who you can go and discuss, because sometimes, thank God we don't know everything, but we find people that know everything, or at least try to get them in the same place, and we can get that knowledge passed to us.
Thank you.
Just make one other comment. We talk about risk and risk-based approaches and these sort of things, and all the time. We use that word risk all the time. And I think where we need to get better is doing risk assessment and having common, maybe for your organization, having a common approach. Pick a methodology, maybe pick a couple that are, fit for purpose for the different maybe scenarios that you have to do risk assessments for. But get that skill, gain that skill within your company to do those risk assessments, because that's fundamental to figuring out, what controls you want to apply, how much money you want to spend, et cetera.
I agree, and I wanted to ask you a question about that, Mark. Is that something that Shell is willing to share or share parts of it with the rest of the world to develop some kind of a common approach on risk assessments? And I do also know that there are other companies out there that do risk assessments or cyber PHAs, if you will. I'd be interested in if any of the other users on the panel here have considered such an approach. So I guess it's a multi-pronged question. Is this something that Shell would be willing to share with the rest of the world, and with the hopes of developing some kind of a common approach? Are the other users on the panel looking at these types of approaches? And could we ever arrive at a common approach for this?
Yeah, well, I think we'd be willing to share it, but we've got to get there ourselves. So,
yeah.
But I think fundamentally, we're going to take a hard look at the cyber PHA process. It's based on the ISA TR-84 procedure. We've already gotten that written up, basically, but there may be some other scenarios where we may adjust the procedure based upon a fit for purpose, cost-effective way to do it. So there may be a handful of scenarios. But again, we're kind of not there yet either. So we have some work to do. But yeah, I think conceptually we would be willing to share. But the idea is to base it on an industry standard methodology and not come up with some Shell specific way of doing it.
Okay. Peter?
Yeah, from our point of view, is such that we actually actively engaged with the IEC and ISA activities here, and we try our utmost in order to support the development of the standards, because we firmly believe that this is a common challenge. This is not a challenge for the vendors, this is not a challenge for the integrators or a challenge for the operating companies. This is a common challenge the entire industry and all market participants need to cope with, because if we would not be able to solve this challenge and to cope with this challenge in an adequate fashion, a dedicated part of the technology will be dead. We've seen similar things in the past in certain areas of this planet. I heard the term field bus war, right? This is a good example what should not happen in the security arena. The thing is that actually still the baselines are under development, and of course every company need to find their own way of coping with it. But again, I think if we want to really resolve this overall challenge, then this will require a common effort and a common close collaboration between all parties that have interests in this technology and that are active at the market.
Okay. I think we're out of time. Unless anybody has any other last comments they want to make, or?
I was going to say, we utilize a custom application based upon vessel type that actually will provide that roadmap to the customer, the ship owners,
Okay, great.
of where those vulnerabilities are, medium, low, medium, and high, and that they can, where to start first.
Unless there's any other questions from the audience, I want to thank our presenters, thank our panelists. Please, let's give them a round of applause.